When I was 30 years old, I had this vision I talk about a lot where I didn't own a guitar, wasn't really into the rock and roll culture. I had short hair. I was working for a police department, and I was taking a shower, and I got this vision where I saw myself building guitars for my heroes like Jimmy Page. And it was it was ridiculous, but I was shaking. I had goosebumps all over myself. And I told my wife, I want to start building guitars. 30 years old, never cut a piece of wood, run down to Home Depot, buy a $99 bandsaw. And I go into the lumber section. I'm like, well, that looks like wood. That looks like the stuff you cut. I'm like, how hard can it be? You just draw a picture of a guitar on a piece of wood and you cut it out. That's the guitar. So for 3 years, I just kind of experimented in my basement, making mistakes after mistakes, learning. And weird stuff started happening again. Things started lining up. Serendipity started to take place. The right people started coming to my life. Started feeling good about myself again. I felt like I was on the right path. What is this? Is this magic?
I'm very pleased to have Randy Parsons as my guest on this week's episode of Life with Strings Attached. Born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and now residing in rural Kansas, this dark horse of lutherie has a history of building with a dramatic flair, such as using a cattle skull for the bracing of a guitar he made for Jimmy Page, or entombing scorpions within the headstock of a guitar made for Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, or the 50,000-piece Alice in Wonderland-inspired Red Queen, which was the feature on the poster at the very first boutique guitar showcase. Parsons is perhaps most famous for having built many now iconic guitars for Jack White, as well as being featured in the film This Might Get Loud, which featured Jack White, The Edge, and Jimmy Page. Always favoring the most entertaining option, Parsons left his former Hell's Angels hideout turned luthier studio in California to favor a century-old church in rural Kansas with a history connected to the infamous Freemasons, where he now resides and builds his inspiring guitars. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Randy Parsons. I hope that you do as much as I did. So Randy, welcome to Life with Strings Attached. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, Jamie, it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I feel like we saw each other all the time for a while, and then all of a sudden, just like I'm in
the world changed and
a Randy-less desert. All of a sudden,
I think we first met 2016, and then I did the. Was it 2015, 2016? I don't know. It's been like 10 years. I did a NAMM show with you.
Yeah. So the first boutique guitar showcase, the first ever one, was January of 2017. So we would have talked in 16, and I think we met face to face at the show. Actually, I don't think we had actually met before that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, here we are again.
How are things there in Kansas?
Things are really good. They're a bit surreal. In that I purchased a big old church, and I live in a church.
Yes.
It's interesting. There is a history. So here in the States, in the 1950s, there was a gasoline company called the Sinclair Gasoline Company, and they had gasoline stations all over the States. And you could tell because there was a big green dinosaur in the front. There's still a few of them that exist. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Henry Sinclair was one of very few billionaires back then. And he was a member of this church. And he was also a 33-degree Freemason. He commissioned all the stained glass windows in the church. There's 42 of them, and they all have religious symbols, except for his private studio, which is upstairs on top of one of the towers. And all the windows are Masonic Freemason windows. It's pretty cool. And I live there now. So...
when I heard you had done that, I thought it was perfectly appropriate. I thought of the people I know who would end up doing exactly that. I can't. There's maybe one person on the list, and you're the list. You're the guy.
It's funny. I hear that, and I don't know why. I don't know why people think that about me. I'm just doing what I feel is normal. I will say this though, it does follow along with my theory that, for the type of guitar maker that I am, you either need to live in your studio or your studio needs to live in your home. I don't think I see a lot of people make the mistake thinking that they have to go lease a second building, and that kind of sometimes begins their downfall. So I've always tried to, like, in California, I lived in my studio, and then here I decided to buy a home and bring my studio back to my home. That's kind of that was the motivation behind it.
Why do you think that? I mean, justify that statement. Why must you either live in your studio or bring your studio to your home?
Well, I think I'm not talking about small production shops or larger companies, but for the individual maker, the guy that actually physically makes each guitar that he sells, you want to reduce the cost that goes into each instrument. You want to think about scaling up, and to me, my definition of scaling means to increase the profitability in each instrument. And so you have to look at everything that goes into the cost. And the number one thing is property. So if you're leasing a commercial building and your sole income is guitar making, then you're paying for your mortgage and you're paying someone else's mortgage. It just gets ridiculous really quick. And I recently saw this in a good friend that they got a little bit of money, not very much, and instantly went out and hired a bunch of people and leased a commercial building, and we're out of business in 3 months. I'm like, okay, what are you doing? You got to keep it at home. And not only that, but for me, I'm just speaking for myself, but the stress of managing another building affected my creativity. There's when you don't have that anxiety and you have a little more freedom. And so like right now, I can tell you that I'm building my best, and I've probably produced more instruments in the last 2 years than 10 years of California.
Really?
So, yeah, absolutely.
So, you're talking about like on an economic level, and you're talking about on a stress level. But, do you think as far as a creativity and productivity level, you think or do you connect those things also?
Well, every situation is different. So when are you saying that it's not very inspiring to work out of your garage? I would agree. I will admit this is a different situation in that my basement shop is 5,000 square feet with 15-foot ceilings. So it doesn't feel like a home shop, and you're surrounded by, castle walls.
Yeah.
But that was a calculated thing on my part, where I was willing to leave California and move to Kansas just to have that perfect shop. So I'm not saying compromise your space. I'm just saying if you're not willing to move, then you're just not willing to put everything into it. And if you're not willing to take risks, then you're just, I don't know what to tell you. I know a lot of, like, I have a friend that just graduated from Lutheran school, and he can't get a job, but he won't leave his city. And so, what do it's like, okay, well, that's the amount of effort that you're willing to put into it, and you're going to get back what you put in. So there you go.
That's super interesting, because the last podcast we released before we're recording this one was with Michael Greenfield, and it came up in the session that he's been in the same place for a really long time, but the area is being gentrified and the cost of his shop has substantially gone up, and he doesn't want to leave. He's in Montreal. He doesn't want to leave the area, and I made a similar sort of observation. I don't want to say argument. I made an observation that, as a Canadian, as American, all of us are descending from people who said, "Oh, there's an opportunity over there." Often it was, we cannot afford to live here anymore. Where we're suffering where we are. Sometimes it was war, sometimes it was economic, sometimes it was famine. Part of my family came over during the Irish potato famine. There wasn't enough food, right? And they went to Canada for opportunity. But even in Canada, my father's from the island of Newfoundland, and those were poor little fishing ports. And when everybody grew up, they all went to Toronto. They went to Fort McMurray. They went where the work was. They went where they could, not necessarily even where the work was, because they could do something there, but where the value proposition of what you're going to put into it and what you can get back out of it was more appealing. And that's effectively what we're doing. You're saying you're doing the same work you were doing in California, but now you're doing it in Kansas, and less of that of the return is going into the upkeep of someone else's real estate, and you're able to turn it into life of your own. And I I'm blanking on exactly who said it. I think it was Jackson Brown Jr., which is not the musician. He was a writer who said something like, "The cost of everything is the amount of life you exchange for it." Everything we do, the cost of it is the amount of life that you can exchange for it. And I know you've been aware of that, and I've also positioned myself in a way that I want to live a good life while doing the work we do. I'm here in our place in Tuscany with my wife because we spent a lot of time traveling here and went, the cost of living is really low in Tuscany and the life is really great, and so we're splitting our time between Canada and here at this point. And you can do that. But a lot of people say, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you pick up and move from California to Kansas or from Canada to Italy, whatever it happens to be. And I don't know.
Well, I think I you have to have a little bit of faith in yourself. You have to take a little bit of risk. For me, it's about having an adventure. I've always been, I've always loved the old stories of the excitement in the beginning of an adventure, and then the challenges, that you have to overcome halfway through the adventure.
Yes. Episode 2.
And the dire circumstances as you get towards the end. And it's amazing that it always works out if you have, if you believe in yourself, you have good work ethics, and you don't give up. It's a story that's been told a million times. It always works out, and I think you have to believe that and have the guts. And a lot of people, I'm not saying I'm heroic, but a lot of people just don't have the guts to change, or they fear too much. Well, I can't do it because of this or that, or they just don't believe it's going to work out. And I think I'm a little bit like you in the gypsy category, where it's like after about 10 years, it's time to move on. I don't know what that is. I left Seattle. So maybe we should go back a little bit.
Sure.
Discuss kind of my career. So I began my career in 1995 in Seattle, and I was really aggressive, knocking down doors, took a lot of chances, and I built up a pretty cool business. And then by about 2013, it had been 18 years. Seattle was becoming expensive, but I had some really good clients, and it was a big market. So there was really no reason to leave because of money. I just had to look at my life and decide, it's like, well, I want to experience more, and I want a better life, and I want to live in a better area, and I want to live where there's sun and palm trees and beach and all that. So why can't I just do what I've been doing in Seattle? And I had been working so hard, I kind of needed to reward myself with that. So I moved to California in 2013 and leased a huge commercial building. And I think you know this, but George Christie has a show on Discovery Channel called American Outlaw. And George Christie was a former Hells Angel president of Southern California. I took over his hideout basically in Ventura, California. And below me were a couple of businesses still run by the Hells Angels. So I developed a friendship with those guys for 8 years. And it was a beautiful location, touristy. It was the Mediterranean of the West Coast, they called it, 2 blocks from the beach. But it was expensive. It was really expensive. And I really got to the point where, like most small business owners that lease a place, they wake up after 10 years and realize they have nothing, and they just gave someone $500,000 worth of rent.
Mm-hmm.
And if the carpet gets pulled, what do they have? They have absolutely nothing. So that motivated me to make a change. And so then I became really extreme on doing everything the opposite, as far as all the money that I put into guitar making, all the costs associated with having this business and what it would cost to produce an instrument and go out and sell it. I looked at every aspect of that and decided, well, I need a location that's cheap. I need a building that's cheap. I need to own it right out. I paid cash for this church. And so that's what I did. So I decided that I had my reward, which was 10 years in California under the sun. It was time to get back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, the Midwest might be unbearable. So what if I bought a castle? And then I could at least live in this castle. And so here I am. Now I'm talking to you. So that's kind of the quick version.
I love it. Castle in the Midwest.
All right.
Yeah. From the Hell's Angel hideout to the church in the Midwest.
Yeah, I still have all my Hell's Angels support stickers on my car. And
Yes.
it's kind of funny because I live in a very small town. And just to put it in perspective, there's 27 churches in town.
Is yours one of them?
So there was one.
Yeah. So I want to know, is that part of the 27 or is that excluded from are they active churches?
Well, I never
or are they
actually drove
church-like
around
buildings?
and counted. I never counted.
Okay.
My real estate agent told me, I told her, I commented, I said, geez, there's a lot of churches in town. She's like, yeah, there's 27 of them. So
Okay.
I don't know if there's now 26.
All right. What I want to know
there's
is
a
that
lot of churches.
one day will there be a Midwest village of things that look like churches that are all guitar makers?
It's becoming it is becoming the thing. I got in at the right time where this church just sat dormant, and I finally made an offer and they took it. And now these churches in the Midwest, you've got 6 or 7 offers the second they go on market.
Okay.
I think a lot of people are leaving the areas that are just unaffordable. And you have a lot of these cool, funky buildings like schools and churches and post office that the county just can't keep up. And even here in town, I mean, it's the members of the church, they dwindle. And then before you know it, you have to upkeep a 120-year-old building. It's just impossible.
Yeah. Yes.
Of course, we call this an old church here. I'm sure in Italy, this would be a new build, right? This would be a modern building.
Yes. I don't know what year your church is from, but the room I'm in is from the 15th century.
Oof. Yeah, this is 1910. So
Right. So I was in a church yesterday, which has its doors open because the paintings inside were done by Raphael.
Wow.
And so they've partnered with the Uffizi in Florence, where the Uffizi is saying, hey, let's expand the borders of the Uffizi to all the places that we know that artists who are within the Uffizi, the Raphaels, the Michelangelos, the Da Vinci's, so on and so forth, where we know that they have paintings of this fresco in this building and these paintings in this church were done by this artist, so on and so forth. And you can connect with them and take a little tour to find the other places, not in museums, which is interesting. And so, but yes, it means that there's, buildings here and churches I've been in this week that are 1,000 years old. Yeah.
When I was 15, I lived in London. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Tower Bridge.
Yes.
So we were on the public side, I guess you'd call it. There's the industrial side. There's a little condo. And so we had a little condo. And you could just walk across that bridge and quickly go into the industrial area. And a lot of those buildings back then, they would just leave their doors open. And you would walk in there and they would preserve the little corners because they were, 15th, 16th century buildings. And there would be like a rope around a little like torture device, with a little plaque that said, it was just, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So I can imagine,
Yeah, it's strange, particularly for people like you and I who are mostly from the New World, to interact with these ancient things. They're very, as we were decorating in here, it has the classic exposed, you can't see them, but above me are the very classic exposed wooden beams that are so normal here in Tuscany. And at first, as we're starting to decorate and think about what lights we're putting up and such, I thought, oh, we can't touch those. I'm like, are you kidding me? No, look at all the holes and nails in those things. They don't see those as precious here at all. Those are they're 600 years old, but so is every other building and house in the neighborhood. It's the normal here, and there's a sense of history and a sense of time here that well, I'm still becoming accustomed to, frankly. But Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com.
It's good to actually see it, because if you don't see it, it's almost hard to believe that it actually existed. Mm-hmm. I often think about instrument manufacturing. If you really start doing the math as far as supply chain, how many makers it would take to supply school kids to find that 1% that was able to, perform at a level, strings, repairs, it almost doesn't make sense. It's almost like you can't find a lot of information about that. And when you think about how hard it is today, just to, keep supplies, abrasives, glues, parts, get strings, all this, and we live in a modern world with airplanes and cars, and machines, and you think about all the music that was produced and all the musicians that it would have taken to get to that level. Yeah. It almost doesn't make sense to me. I actually, if I have some time in the next couple of years, that's kind of an area I want to start exploring to figure out how they pulled that off. Everything that's involved with producing musical instruments at a level that we're told took place. Yeah. Last weekend or a week and a half ago now was the Cremona show, the big violin show from the heart of the violin world. Where the Stradivari and Amaris were, and there's a luthier aspect to that also. And so, actually, in the last week, I've had, I think, 5 different guitar makers here because many guitar makers came to Europe. And while they were here in town or in the country anyways, they swung by and hung out with us and had dinner and such. And they're still attracted to this romance of this historical place. And there's research going on there. Tom Lania, who's D'Addario's acoustic engineer, is doing projects here in Cremona with the violin makers. And there's cross-pollination between guitar projects and violin projects going on. And people are going to the Fiemme forest where the spruce that said to be built into the Stradivaris comes from. And they're trying to study this wood. And there's a lot of, I don't know how much of it is truth and how much of it is mysticism, to be honest. But there's a lot of science going on around it, trying to understand it. And some of that science is funded to prove the reality of their narrative. And so I'm not, I think sometimes it starts with a bias. The bias is, this is amazing, tell us why it's amazing. Well, that's different than, saying what makes this different than something else and is that better? But. Yeah. But it's like the violin is a sexy instrument. So, but what about all the others? It's like, who was making all the others, and the saws and the blades and the rosin and the strings and the music stands. It would have taken a small village in every market to produce all that. It seems like there's a lot of information that's been lost. And I wonder also, it's good to hear that a lot of people still take interest in that. And it's obvious why, but I feel like we may be coming to an end. I think handmade instruments just will be reduced to an art form and regarded as high art. and we'll
Mm-hmm.
see what happens in the next 100 years. But I I started this Wonderland series that you know about,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the challenges, what I did is they were fantasy instruments, a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
inlay and 50,000 parts, a bunch of beautiful wood, and the idea basically was this might be my last all hands on build. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of I I was talking about artificial intelligence, 10 years ago, and people were saying
Mm-hmm.
it was a whack job. But my thing is, I'm like, well, it's probably going to be a better designer, and the last couple of years, the explosion in over the top instruments and the detail and the execution of that detail is almost mind blowing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just a result of the cost coming down when it comes to lasers and CNCs and people
Mm-hmm.
having access to digital design AI, where it's like design me 1,000 rosettes based on this art form, and then you pick the best one, and then you go to the laser and you cut it all out, and it's like a no-name guitar maker now has a soundboard that if they would have produced that 15, 20 years ago, they'd be on the cover of a magazine. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying it's a bad thing. I think that the sum of all that is just going to continue to exponentially produce mind-blowing instruments.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the idea of hand making an instruments is really, number one, you can't compete. So I think the change has happened. I don't know what you think about that, but anyway, so my Wonderland series was my attempt, kind of like to put a nail in the coffin of a truly handmade instrument. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I had, a bunch of characters. I would name my instruments loosely on the Alice in Wonderland characters. The White
Mm-hmm.
Rabbit, Red Queen, and all that. Um, and I'm still finishing kind of the last batch of those. But my point is, handmade, the tradition of hand making versus where we are now, where we're entering this new phase of just these amazing machines and AI being able to design anything we want,
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to make that into reality with the cost coming down on all these crazy machines. I know makers right now that they say, yeah, I want to start making guitars, and I'm 18 years old, and their dad goes out and buys them these machines that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you almost you can compete with them because you have a name, but as far as just the object goes, moving atoms around and putting them back together, it's just spectacular stuff that's coming out. And I don't know how the dust settles on all that. What are your thoughts?
So the one of the amazing, sometimes seemingly cruel joke of the reality of our world is that the skills that it takes to create something truly remarkable are the same skills it takes to judge it. And so the part that's really hard to predict and to falsify is that skill to be able to judge it properly. And so I heard a discussion between uh, Joel Hage, who is the manager for Gerhard Richter and Damien Hirst, some of the biggest selling artists in who are alive, some of the greatest living artists, and Jordan Peterson, a psychologist who's become
Yeah.
very famous in recent years,
Know him?
and Jordan Peterson and Haji were talking about art and really how you quantify art, and they talked about Warhol's warehouse and someone from like Seattle, like like a Dale Chihuly. There are artists who have studios, and those studios are full of people who work for them also, right? And so how do you know when it's art? Does it matter if the artists themselves are the ones creating it? And the conclusion that they came to, which I thought was very interesting, is that the artist is the one who says it's done. They know when it's completed and when it's not good enough, when you have to keep going and when it's time to stop. And that part is really hard to train. I see a lot of very talented woodworkers. And increasingly, I've seen a lot of people who are very competent in running a CNC machine and doing joinery and putting it back together like you're talking about. But I see too much of the CNC machine in the final result. I think the CNC is a tool. And I have no problem with CNC at all. I think people like Ulrich Teufel who use a CNC machine are brilliant in what they do, and they can't do it without the CNC machine. Like, it does things the human hand is just not capable of doing in some work. Other times we're using it in a too rudimentary kind of way. And it becomes decal, and it becomes decorative art. And this happened sort of in the rise of industrialization, sort of pre-industrial design, where people just started painting and decorating and pinstriping and putting flowers and all sorts of stuff all over machinery to try and sell it. And it wasn't art. It was just like a decalmania, I think is what Raymond Loewy called it, with people just doing these fins on cars and pinstripes. And sometimes it can be really well done, but often it's just decorative bullshit. And it's really hard to know when it's one or the other, but when it's right, you're not questioning it. You know it. And that sounds so ridiculous. But when it's right, you look at it and go, fuck, that's wow.
Yeah. The guitar is interesting because, who is the artist? Is it the guitar maker or is it the player that then gets that instrument?
It's
or
both.
Are they both?
It's two different things.
It's like innovation. It's like the Floyd Rose it's great, but it took Eddie Van Halen to really introduce it to a generation.
Right.
Yeah, and then as far as it's important that we make things, we make beautiful things, but like with guitar making, it's almost like there's 3 phases of guitar making. I think the first is the easiest, and that is making something pretty. We can all do the cool fins and the pretty flowers on the guitar. The second phase is a little bit harder, and that takes a few years, and that's producing something that plays good, feels good, and sounds good. It really took me, and when that light bulb goes off for a maker, it seems so easy. Like, oh yeah, it's really simple. It's all about balance, understanding wood tone, profiles, and all that stuff. But it took me 20 years to get to that point. And so if you give up during that 20 years, you're never going to get to that point. And then the third phase to me is the finish work. And I don't mean finish as in just the spray lacquer. I mean everything, the presentation, the prep to the finish, the actual finish. So those are the 3 phases. And so I'm almost there. I think last time we talked, I would always tell you, I would say, Jamie, I'm just not there. I don't feel like I'm there. I don't think my instruments are good enough. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? And there was something, it's like, yeah, I know they're cool looking, but when I pick them up and I hold them, there's something that's, I'm still disappointed. And then when it comes to the final product, although I like a little bit of personality on the instruments, a little bit of fingerprints here and there, but at the same time, when it comes to some of my instruments, I like perfection. And I would always be disappointed. I know everyone is. They can look at little areas that no one will ever notice, however, there are a lot of makers that are perfect. They're just like, oh my God. Anyways, I finally feel like it's been 30 years now, but it's taken me 30 years to get to that point. And when you get to that point, it seems so simple,
Mm.
So yeah, so with all these machines and these new makers doing all this crazy stuff, unless they have the longevity to keep at it, um, yeah, I don't know. It's just a bunch of bullshit, I guess.
Technology changes. I mean, even the Torres guitar, the way they built them in Spain on the Solera was a technical innovation. To build a guitar that way on a for those who don't know, a Solera is kind of a flat board where you build the guitar, you put the neck down, you build the sides into the neck, the tail block, but you're building the guitar kind of upside down, face down, if you will, fretboard down and such. But that allowed for a much faster production and a much more consistent sort of build than what was happening before that. But that now we don't look at that like technology, but that is technology. The mill was technology. With a couple of stones and some water and some paddles that made it. But all the great cities of the old world are all built on rivers because the amazing power source we had was hydropower, was water movement. And so, but we look at a mill today and we don't really think of it as technology, but it was. And each one of those makes it a little bit easier and it makes it a little bit more advanced. And then we get truer sort of flat stones so that we can make cleaner edges, and and sand
When does
things.
it
And
get too easy that we become lazy? Sometimes I feel like we peaked. We peaked from like the 30s to the 60s, and then it's been kind of a slow decline.
really,
I mean,
now,
well,
I'm going to piss
if
a
you
lot of
look at,
people off here, Randy, but I see a lot of guitars in the 1960s, and I'm like, this is not the peak. This is definitely not the best that we could do. Sorry, like we,
but that's where
we
it all. But it wasn't that sure they weren't polished and they were rough around the edges, but it was like that's when the electric guitar was born. I mean,
mm,
you could trace it back to the laptops in the 30s
mm,
with the pickup and the big volume dial.
yeah,
But the Fender Strat and the Les Paul,
hmm,
I mean that changed 100 years of music, or will change 100 years of music.
hmm,
And nothing seems to have come along that has had that much of an impact. Um, I mean, everything from air travel, automobiles, subways. We've
hmm.
gotten better. Technology's gotten better, but we haven't like come together as a. I'm just where are the true. I guess maybe it's technology and AI and computers that's the new technology that's going to change things and move things forward. But I always think about what people did with so little, 50
Hmm.
years, 70 years, 100 years ago. And it blows my mind. So
Hmm.
there is an argument as far as have we peaked as a species, and
Hmm.
are we headed ultimately in the wrong direction? You mentioned Jordan Peterson, and I saw
Hmm.
that speech on art, and it was beautiful. Everyone should see that.
Hmm.
But he also believes that we're in decline. So
Culturally in decline.
as a species, we're in decline.
Well, it depends on which
And,
conversation
and
you're talking about. So, I mean, there's currently in the West we're in decline, but as far as the world is concerned, we're substantially further ahead. Like than 60 years ago, we've basically solved hunger in the West at this stage. There's no famine in the West at this point, which is a major issue. 60 years ago, two-thirds of the world was living hungry all the time, all the time.
absolutely, we're more comfortable. And I would rather
Yeah.
be who I am right now than a billionaire 70 years ago.
Hmm.
You know, absolutely. Can you imagine going to the dentist 70 years ago?
Right.
It'd be horrific.
Yeah.
So we're
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely more comfortable. Um, you can argue both sides. I understand
Of
that
course.
the world is doing better,
Mhm.
but is that the calm before the storm? I'm taking a very fatalistic approach here, aren't I?
Yeah, that's okay. The fatalistic approach is kind of the normal approach these days, to be honest. And I remain on the optimistic side of things because I have to look at how we've progressed in almost every way. Um, and the fatalistic side of things was true 60 years ago. But all the incredible progress that we made in the last 60 years, that wasn't true 60 years ago. And if you look at the world on a whole, we've definitely improved, improved. And
It's
so,
hard not to argue that.
yeah, yeah. And so I think that if we look at a broader sort of 30,000 foot sort of view of the situation, we would say that overall humanity has improved. The world has somehow improved as a result of it. I know that there are some problems with obviously with the environment and such, but if you look at the environmental problems of 100 years ago, the amount of the amount of smoke and crap we were pumping out 100 years ago, it's better today. It absolutely is better today. And there's a lot of things happening right now. The Great Barrier Reef is recovering. NASA has sent out greenification of the desert photographs. You don't see them. You got to go looking for that stuff. But the world is actually greener today than it was 10 or 20 years ago, while we're all crying environmental
Absolutely.
problems. And there are environmental problems. Don't get me wrong. I know people who are out there. One of our guests from a few weeks ago, Richard Sears, who's one of the world's foremost specialists in whales, talks about being in a boat and going for miles and miles and miles through a sea of garbage. I know those problems are legitimate, but overall, we're aware of it. We're not making the same stupid choices. You and me wouldn't be at a beach and just sort of take some garbage and chuck it in the water, but our grandparents probably would have. They didn't think twice about it. Right? And so we are making
Yeah,
improvements.
I'm not. I haven't never really been that nervous about the whole global warming thing.
Right.
Um, I see it probably the same way you do. But there's other areas. There's a population collapse that can be a potential problem. Um, and it's not it may not even be a bad thing as far as I do think the AI storm is coming and it is going
Hmm.
to affect our species, but that may be a good
Yeah.
thing. That may allow us to just do things that we could never imagine that's good for humanity. Um,
Hmm.
Having a military background, though, the
Hmm.
things that I do fear, surveillance,
Yeah.
um, weapons, nuclear war,
Yes.
that stuff gets really scary. I remember seeing drones come on the market 15, 20 years ago, and I thought these are amazing, but surely law enforcement, the military won't use them because
Right.
that's just a rabbit hole you don't want to start. And sure enough, that's they're scary. Smart
Yeah.
bullets that go around corners, drones.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you saw there's a gal going around doing a podcast with everyone talking about how close we are to nuclear war and what it would look like,
Hmm.
and that's frightening.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think I'm with you, and I'm not trying to take this conversation to a dark part, but we were talking about CNCs and AI and all that.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
where I'm at is it's probably a 40-60 coin toss where 60% looks really good and
Hmm.
40% looks really scary. That's just
Hmm.
where I'm
Hmm.
at.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that it's okay to live on the edge that way, and I do believe one of the articles written about you years ago referred to as the dark horse of Luthery, Mr. Parsons, and I think that you live with a certain amount of that sort of all the time. But at the same time, I've known you to be a kind and generous person. I've really enjoyed all of the conversations and the time that we've had a chance to spend face to face together in California and such. And so, let's talk about that for a second. Your guitars, because you don't have to look very far with your guitars to sort of see that darkness. Also, frankly, with your Bat series, the fact that you're in a church. It's someone from my particular background growing up on Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne. During the period that inspired me to play music was the period where everyone had pentagrams on the bass drums and Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz, and singing about Aleister Crowley and all these sort of, I don't want to say romanticism, but let's say at least a recognition of the dark side, if you will. Star Wars, come to the dark side. All of this kind of stuff is a part of the generation, and somehow is always appealing. And when you build, you know, using a cattle skull for braces, or you sent me pictures of a build that you did for Jack White once, where there were three emperor scorpions in the headstock that you completely covered up, that you cannot see. There's no evidence of them other than the build pictures, which I presume, I've seen, and I'm sure other people have seen, but they're not that common, And why do you do? Why? What drives choices like that, Randy?
Um, yeah, I'm almost two makers because I have my electric world, and it's
Mm-hmm.
the connected to the circus of rock and roll, and that's
Mm-hmm.
and then I have my acoustics. And a lot of my clients that buy my acoustics sometimes don't even understand that I build electrics, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I grew up in the same period of the '70s, the cool rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a child, I was very shy. I didn't speak. They were very concerned about me, and I had two older sisters and an older brother. And I would always sneak in their room, and I would look at their magical albums, and I would see these people. And so I was always fascinated with that whole the magic of rock and roll, and it did have power. It had power because I took up the musical instrument because I could speak through that in grade school, and then in sixth grade I took up the electric guitar. And I was, like I said, I was very antisocial, a very quiet, shy person. But that electric guitar was magic.
Mm-hmm.
It instantly gave me popularity at school. It was
Mm-hmm.
like this magic sword and at the same time, I was always obsessed with my older sisters and the concerts and the shirts that they wore and the albums that they would bring home and the music that would come from their bedrooms. So as I became a teenager, I really got deep into the whole rock and roll culture. And Aleister Crowley's house that Jimmy Page bought, and all the spooky occult symbols on all the albums and all that stuff. That was kind of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
But I also recognized that there was a level of silliness to the whole thing, but there was also a level of realness where these rock stars they did have magic. They were treated like kings. They got off buses and airplanes, and people would scream and fall on the ground, and they'd put on these concerts where 100,000 people would show up, and they would buy their stuff and wear their stuff. So I thought, well, there's got to be some type of spooky magic, spookiness from a distance taking place.
Mm-hmm.
And as I embraced the guitar and got into bands myself, I experienced a lot of that magic. And when I left it all, because after college, I got rid of all my instruments and I just completely rejected that whole lifestyle and that whole scene. I really got off track, and the serendipity that always took place in my life was gone. It just kind of vanished. And again, spooky things from a distance. When I was 30 years old, I had this vision I talk about a lot where I didn't own a guitar, wasn't really into the rock and roll culture. I had short hair. I was working for a police department, and I was taking a shower, and I got this vision where I saw myself building guitars for my heroes like Jimmy Page. And it was it was ridiculous, but I was shaking. I had goosebumps all over myself. And I told my wife, I want to start building guitars. 30 years old, never cut a piece of wood, run down to Home Depot, buy a $99 bandsaw. And I go into the lumber section. I'm like, well, that looks like wood. That looks like the stuff you cut. I'm like, how hard can it be? You just draw a picture of a guitar on a piece of wood and you cut it out. That's the guitar. So for 3 years, I just kind of experimented in my basement, making mistakes after mistakes, learning. And weird stuff started happening again. Things started lining up. Serendipity started to take place. The right people started coming to my life. Started feeling good about myself again. I felt like I was on the right path. what is this? Is this magic?
Mm-hmm.
So some very bizarre things that I don't even talk about happened, where I felt like, okay, well, I have some internal things going on, but I have some external forces taking place that are definitely guiding me as I've started this new career at age 30. And it gave me confidence to where I took a lot of risks, and those risks really paid off. And long story short, 20 years later, I'm at the Beverly Hills, some hotel in Beverly Hills, walking down the hallway to Jimmy Page's room, and I have a guitar for him. And I hung out with Jimmy Page that day and gave him a guitar. So that little vision I had 20 years ago actually came true, along with some other things, to where it's almost hard to deny that some type of magic took place. And I started to embrace my past. My childhood memories started to come up. And before I knew it, I was building these guitars that kind of represented everything in my life that meant something to me, that proved to me that it was the right path. It's almost like something like the things that the powerful images that I experienced when I was a child really makes you think about time. It's like, in free will, it's like, are those powerful images because we're seeing a glimpse of something that has already been written? Like time is just a bunch of blocks and the future actually exists. There's a little glitch in the system where you see an image that's so powerful and you're like, why was that so powerful? Why did the hair on my back stand up? And then 30 years later, that image is actually coming to fruition in reality, where you're actually experiencing that thing that gave you chills 30 years earlier. So I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I don't know any of this crap. But it's a theme with me and my guitars. So when I build the spooky stuff, that just feels right, and it's just a reflection of some of the experiences I had when I was a child. And maybe I'm trying to just hold on to those experiences, and reflect them in my art. I mean, it's weird. I think other people can explain all that better than I can, because I'm just living it. I don't really think a lot about how to articulate all this stuff, so I just kind of blabble on. But I hope I kind of did an okay job. And then before I knew it, I'm being called the Dark Horse Luther, and all. And people are like, "Oh, he's so spooky. He bought a church so he can do, whatever he's doing." And I'm just like, no, I feel like I'm just a normal guy doing what I feels right.
Yeah.
But it is kind of weird that I ended up in this church, because that's another vision that I. But it is a vision I also had.
All right, tell me about it. I'm just going to sit back and have a drink.
Well, it's just that, like I said, when I was a child, I had all these visions of how my life was going to be. But when I became a little older, I thought, it's a silliness. That those things don't really happen. I need to, get a haircut and get a real job and join society. But when I did that, it really felt like I was off track. So when I jumped back into the silliness and back into my dreams, things happened. And then, when I was a kid, I'm going to be in the music industry and I'm going to have a castle and all this stupid stuff that you think when you're 13 years old. Now I'm 60 and I live in a castle and I'm in the music industry. So I don't know.
I love it. I recently, let's see if this helps sort of align all this, Randy. I recently heard that, we don't really decide our future. We decide our habits, and our habits decide our future. And I think that might explain a bit, Randy, because I think that you did decide habits, which put you in line for that future, which you wanted. I'm not saying sort of name it and claim it, but I'm saying it doesn't look totally out of character for you to be where you are now because of the last 30 years that you made choices that became your habits that led in this direction. And so they're consistent with who you are. And So I think that there's something to that, and that it'll seem serendipitous, because it is what you wanted. It is what you were sort of aiming for, even if you weren't particularly conscious of it or not. But you did develop habits which were more sympathetic with this vision than another vision, let's say. Does that sound agreeable to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. But there are spooky things from a distance that, like, there is one story that I've never told. Um,
But you're about to?
that to this that I'm about to.
All right.
I hope I don't butcher it. But to this day, it still blows my mind.
Yeah.
So in my early days, I decided to start a repair shop. You
Hmm.
know, but to be a guitar maker, I need to make some money. Let's go into repairs.
Yeah.
Musician's Friend, you've heard of them, the
Yeah.
retailer.
I have a few. Oh, the
Um,
repair retailer. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the retailer, Musician's Friend, they're an online catalog.
Yeah, I'm
So
sorry. I was
before they
fucking
were a
with you, Randy.
catalog,
Yeah.
what's that?
I'm sorry. I was just fucking with you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Carry on. I
You
don't mean such a friend. It's of
don't
course with
mess
you.
with
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Owned by
I'll
Guitar
do
Center.
witchcraft.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, yes, yes.
um, so they actually they tried to compete with Guitar Center. They opened a
Right.
bunch of retail stores, and
Yes.
they opened one in my neighborhood. And they
Okay.
were basically Guitar Center. You walk in there, it felt like a Guitar Center, but a little bit more homey.
Right.
So I went in there,
Yeah.
and I had a little bit of newspaper article because I was really aggressive about doing some local press when I was like building in my basement. You know, I was building
Yeah.
all these crazy guitars that looked good, put them in coffee shops, got a little bit of press. Went to Musician's Friend. I said, "Hey, I got a little bit of a theater background as far as like constructing stages. I want to put a little cool
Hmm.
shop, a little Harry Potter shop in the back corner of your store, and I want to offer repairs. I'll be like a third party, and you get a little bit of the cut." And I'm like, yeah, that
Hmm.
sounds pretty good, you know. So I did that, and I was there for 2 years, and I just killed it. There were, you know, by the second year, there were people in line to see me, and I became very
Hmm.
popular in Seattle. It was a suburb of Seattle, and
Hmm.
so it was a complete hit, you know. And every year, every 6 months, they would let me build my shop a little bit bigger, you know. And I hired, you know, a bunch of people to work there as well, and so
Hmm.
it was great. And then Guitar Center decided, you know, we don't like Musician's Friend. I think what we're going to do is we're going to buy them,
Hmm.
and we're going to close all their retail spaces, and we're going to take them over, and we're going to turn Musician's Friend into a catalog online.
Hmm.
And so that's what actually
Hmm.
happened. Guitar Center decided,
Okay.
well, instead of competing with these guys, we're just going to buy them and shut them down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they're like, well, what we'll do is we'll shut this store down because it's kind of in a weird market on half hour away from Seattle. We're going to open a flagship store in Seattle. And so
Hmm.
I was like, well, hey, so what's going to happen to me? And the Guitar Center execs were like, oh, yeah, we'll let you come. We'll let you
Hmm.
come. And so they weren't going to do that. They were actually going to just kick me out. And so during the time they were lying to me and saying that they would absorb my business and they would let me open up a store over in the Seattle flagship, this new big store they were building,
Hmm.
I contacted one of the managers in Seattle and I said, hey, you know, I'm the guy that has the shop over at Musician's Friend. And I was talking to so-and-so. He said, maybe you guys would let me open up a shop at Guitar Center. And he's like, well, you know, we got this little warehouse next to us if you want to come take a look at it. I'm like, sure. So I drove over there. And they opened the doors to this little warehouse that was right next to the Seattle Guitar Center. And I had my little
Yeah.
digital camera. And I walked in there, I saw this big empty space that wasn't being used. And I took a picture. Went back home. And the next month went by. They started like closing down the store. And I got a call from the regional manager at Guitar Center. And he said, hey,
Hmm.
Randy, really sorry, you know, but we're just going to go a different direction. We're not going to offer third parties. It's too messy. It's really not, you know, corporate guys don't like that. But I wish you good luck. And I was like, okay. Well, I looked at the picture that I took in my camera. And in the corner of the warehouse, they had a bunch of just garbage and stuff and things that had fallen off the ceiling. It was just a mess that had formed my company logo in the right colors. So I had a company logo that was a black strip with a red strip, and there was a female in the middle holding the guitar.
Yeah.
And I looked at the picture, and again, goosebumps, the back of my hair stood up, and I was like, son of a bitch. And I still have that picture today. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's my freaking company logo in the warehouse, and you can't deny it. It was the spookiest thing I've ever seen. And so I just decided that I was moving to Guitar Center. And on the week before they were going to have their grand opening, I packed up my shop in a van and I drove to Seattle. And let me just clarify that they told me they wanted nothing to do with me. They were moving on to a different direction. They wished me good
Yeah.
luck,
Yeah.
you know.
Yes.
And I was on my way to Guitar Center. And on the way to Guitar Center, I swear to God, I got a phone call. And it was the regional guy. And he said, Randy, we've gotten so much outrage from the public that we're not letting you come over to Seattle with us, that we've decided to actually let you have that warehouse. And the thing is, it's like, I was already on my way because of that vision that I saw in the picture. And so that's just another story, like the Jimmy Page, taking a shower, and this photograph of my logo in Guitar Center, that it was like, there's no question that there are external forces at play here. So I agree with you that was a habit of mine, to have this unwavering faith that things will work out. But at the same time, mathematically, the odds of that taking place the way it did are staggering. So it's just hard to explain.
I absolutely agree. And the thing is, Randy, you took action on it. And so you can have a vision, but a vision without action is hallucination. Right. And
Right.
so you actually took action on it, whereas others would not. And that's the reason that you are where you're today. And others are still saying, hey, I had the same idea 30 years ago. You got in your van and you did something about it. You looked up a place in Kansas and you put a bid on the church, presumably. Or sorry, you said no one was bidding, but whatever it was, the point is most people would think that's fucking nuts. That's a that's a crazy. They cannot imagine themselves moving to a different state. I mean, the difference between Midwest rural Kansas and where you were in California, it's a different country.
No,
Like culturally
absolutely.
speaking, it's not the same thing at all. You're not just moving location; you're moving cultures, and climates and everything else. And so, it takes a lot of guts. But the fact is, you do it, and good on you, And
Well,
so, yeah, it's not luck or happenstance, Randy. It's you made
it seems
choices
like
and you're there.
it seems like a combination, though.
Oh,
That's what I'm
sure.
saying. It's like,
You're not an
and
island. Yeah.
and I guess what I mean is that, like, hard to me, like, what is magic? Hard work to me is magic. Hard work produces
Hmm.
results, and it
Hmm.
always
Hmm.
has. And
Hmm.
so if you're sitting around doing nothing, then that's what's going to happen. But if you work your ass off, good things will take place. And in a way, that is a form of magic that we've been given.
Hmm.
We've been given all these rules as
Hmm.
humans to follow. If we do this bad stuff, then bad things will enter our life. We do the good things will enter our life. I will
Yeah.
say this: I do recommend people buy old churches. And people, like you said, people go, "Yeah, you're effing crazy. Why would you do that?" And my response is that a church is basically a mansion without a bathroom and a kitchen, or a shower and a kitchen.
Most of them have a bathroom and a kitchen, actually.
They don't have a shower. Yeah, they don't have
Have
a
a
the
shower.
kitchen
Yeah.
is and they don't have a shower. So if you
Yeah.
can put a shower in a kitchen, and you got a mansion for, um, it's one funny thing. My wife and I like to watch scary movies,
Okay.
and it's a completely different experience watching a scary movie. Especially, our version of a scary movie is the Vatican, evil
Uh-huh.
priests,
Yes,
crucifixes
yes.
turning upside down in the middle of the night. Um, so we'll watch these movies here in an old church, and afterwards, it's like, well, you want to go to the kitchen and get a snack? It's like, no, I'm
No.
not going to the kitchen.
You're trapped in the set and you can't leave.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons we don't have any crucifixes on the wall. We're
Yes.
like, nah, well, we're not going to have those things turn upside down in the middle of the night. It's too much to deal with.
Yeah. Yes, it would be a lot to deal with. I can't watch that kind of stuff at all. I I don't want those images in my head, but others, I know lots of people love it. Lots of people love it, but
Yeah.
I'm not one of them.
I don't do the gory stuff, but the
Yeah,
supernatural,
the supernatural stuff.
again, I guess influences.
Yeah, it's all part of it.
Are you serious about the business of guitar? Then you need to join us on Patreon. We're building a future where guitar makers are able to live prosperous lives making instruments that inspire the musical experience, which helps to create a more beautiful world, where others who are passionate about the guitar can thrive. Those who help in the promotion and resale, trade shows, writing of books and articles are supported as a valuable part of the community. A community where we explore with curiosity and encourage those around us in their endeavors. With a community effort, we can accomplish far more than we can individually. So let's be serious about your guitar business and join us on Patreon at patreon.com/business of guitar. That's patreon.com/business of guitar.
And so, Randy, what I don't know what I'm allowed to talk about, what I'm not allowed to talk about with you. I don't know what's inside scoop that is supposed to remain private or not. But we've had some interesting interactions together over time, and I think I love the story of the Red Queen, but I'm not sure that you can share the story. Can you, if you can share the story of those things? Do you talk about that stuff publicly? There was a really great sort of moment that sort of led to that thing happening. And as a guitar maker, and as an entrepreneur and as someone who, lives creating things, but also having to sell things, is that a
Yeah.
story we can talk about, or we'll save it for another day?
Well, no, we can talk about it. Are you talking about the client and the
I am.
contract? Okay.
Yeah. And they come in because a client who, like Jack White, sent him in, and the client was maybe about to leave, and you threw out a momentary inspiration.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about two different stories.
I'm being very vague here. I'm trying not to not to say too
Well,
much
you're
and tell you it's okay to
so
talk about it. So
I got lucky and I built a iconic electric guitar called the Triple Jet, and that was for Jack White.
mhm,
And there is a story about how that came about, and that was the result of me trying to save a deal. And
mhm,
then there was the story of the Red Queen, how the
mhm,
Red Queen, uh, there was a billionaire client,
mhm,
and I want to be very careful here.
mhm,
He didn't try to screw me because he was a great client,
mhm,
um, but he did trick me a little bit with a contract.
mhm,
And so, when life gives you lemons, what do? You make lemonade. And so,
mhm,
the because of what he did, that inspired my idea to build the entire Wonderland series,
mhm.
which was a better idea than the first idea. So I don't know which story you want to hear,
What story do you want to tell, Randy?
but
I think that
well,
they're interesting stories.
so so Jack White was another weird thing in that the number three was kind of spiritually a weird number that I would always see,
Hmm.
and I understand that when you think about something, you notice it. Like
Hmm.
when you buy a red car,
Yeah.
you tend to start noticing red cars on it. So when someone goes, I keep seeing the number 11, it's like, well, because you're tuned into the number 11, so you're seeing
Hmm.
numbers all day long. But
Hmm.
when you
Hmm.
see you stop and you notice the number 11. However, I was seeing the number 333, which is a common number in the occult, um, and I don't dabble in that stuff at all.
Hmm.
But that was a number that was guiding me. After I moved into Guitar Center, I just kept seeing this 333, and I was like asking people, like, what does it mean? And so one day I got a call, and they're like, "Hey, there's this client that needs a guitar painted, and his name's Jack White." And I knew who Jack White was. He was the guy in the White Stripes, and I
Hmm.
knew a couple of the songs, but I didn't really know a lot about Jack.
Hmm.
So I was like, "Oh yeah, cool, yeah, Jack White. He's a rock star. He's from Detroit. That's weird. Why is he calling me?" And they're like, he saw a couple articles in the newspaper where you put a skull inside the guitar, and he kind of
Hmm.
liked that. So I instantly went to Google and I started researching this guy. I'm like, wow, this guy is he's a heavy hitter. I mean, he seems to be friends with the Rolling Stones and Jimmy Page, and Rolling Stone magazine keeps putting him on the cover. And he's producing Loretta Lynn. He's doing these movies. He's got all these side projects. I'm like, this guy's not a musician. This guy's like an American artist. I'm like, this guy could potentially. He was kind of like a rock star for the rock stars. I mean, to this day, I mention Jack White to a lot of people. They're like, yeah, no, I don't know who that is. But if you're talking to another rock star, an A-lister, and you mention Jack White, they're like, oh my God, Jack White. Yeah, you know, he's amazing. And so I was very excited. I'm like, yeah, I want to build it. I want to do this. And then I also noticed that his number was 333. That way he had the number 333 all over his stuff. I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. Yeah, that's just kind of weird, but whatever. So I really wanted to work for this guy. To me, I felt like the stars had aligned. And he sent me this Gretsch Duo Jet. And he goes, okay, basically I want to call this thing the Triple Jet for this new band I'm starting called the Raconteurs. My color for this band is going to be copper. So I want you to put another pickup in the middle. So it's going to be 3 pickups. That's why I want to call it the Triple Jet, because I like the number 3. And then I want you to spray paint it copper color. And cool. So I did that. I ordered a Gretsch Duo Jet, made it into a Jack White Triple Jet, put a Bigsby on it, and painted it metallic copper. And I sent him the guitar, and he emailed me back, and he was like, wow, this is a great guitar. Thank you so much. You know, you're a great, wonderful person. And I said, you know, I got a bunch of other ideas, you know, if you're interested. And he sent me back this really short, curt email. And it was like, thank you for the guitar. Let's just consider it a beautiful thing. And, or something like, let's just keep the memory a memory and remember it as a beautiful thing and move on with our lives. Basically just completely shutting me down, you know? And I was just like, wow. I was like, how could I land such an important client that aligns with my beliefs and my visions? And all I do is paint this guitar. And I actually had someone else paint it. I didn't even paint the guitar. All I did was route and put a pickup in it. And instantly a light bulb went off in my head. And I wrote him back. I said, well, I'm glad you enjoy the guitar. It's too bad you didn't let me make it out of real copper. That's all I said. And then I got an email back. You can do that? Question mark. You know, and of course I didn't know if I could actually do it.
Yeah.
Because of that little interaction, I built him guitars for the next 10 years. You know, and leading to the Green Machine, which is the Green Machine was another Gretsch I modified with there's a funny story there, a pull-out microphone. So you could play the guitar and then reach down and pull out this retractable microphone and scream in it and let go. And the microphone would retract back up inside the guitar. And that guitar was featured in the movie It Might Get Loud with Jimmy Page, The Edge, and Jack White, which led me to my introduction to Jimmy Page. But again, that was another situation where he emailed me after. So I built him these copper guitars. I built him the black Jet with the scorpions secretly embedded into the headstock. Built him a few other guitars, and he emailed me. He's like, "Hey, can you put a microphone inside a guitar that retracted back?" He's like, "I got this harmonica microphone. It's called the Green Bullet, and I want to put it in this green guitar and retract it." And of course, I was like, yeah, of course I can do that. And it was crazy because the Green Bullet microphone weighs about 5 pounds. It's heavy. And so my first idea was put it into a hair dryer. The cords on a hair dryer, sometimes they'll retract. I was like, I'll just take apart a hair dryer. No way.
We'll pull it up.
Not only would it not even move, but the microphone even pulled it back. So I remember I was in Seattle and I walked into, at the time, there were still vacuum cleaner repair companies. And they were like these old, antique stores. You'd walk in, dust everywhere. And there was like this old
Ironically,
guy.
because they fix vacuums. Shouldn't have any
Right.
dust, man. I know what you're talking about, though.
That could have been a bad sign. Anyway, so I walked in, and this guy looked like Rain Man from the movie. His glasses were this thick.
Yeah.
And I was desperate. And I just laid it out to the guy. I said, listen, I'm putting a 5-pound microphone into a guitar. Guitar is this thick. It needs to retract. And he was like, the Hoover 37819. And he like waddles back in his back room, and he comes out with this like wheel, this big retractable wheel. And I took that back to my shop. And actually, in the movie, It Might Get Loud, there's a scene where I'm routing a hole in the back of this guitar, and I'm dropping this wheel, and it just fits like a glove. And it worked out. So that's the story of Jack White and the Triple Jet.
Yeah. Great. All right. And because I did ask about the Red Queen, and maybe I don't have the story right in my head, man.
So
how did that come to be?
Okay, same situation. So I don't think I told you part two. Part one was, again, I was in my Seattle space next to Guitar Center, and I was very aggressive. And I got word that there was a billionaire coming in daily, and just, one of those, 3 of those, 4 of those, a guy who decided he was going to collect guitars. So he would just walk in, and he didn't have a lot of knowledge. I don't think he was a player. And he was just like, what do I need to buy? And they were like, wow, you should buy a PRS Dragon, 59th anniversary, Les Paul. Sure, blah, 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 blah. I gave one of the sales, I don't think I told you this, but I gave one of the salespersons, I gave him $1,000 cash
Okay.
in my shop. I said, dude, here's $1,000. I want you to bring that guy into my shop. And so he's like, okay. And so he brought him into my shop, and I met him, and he was, he's a smart businessman. He's not a touchy-feely guy. Okay. He's just not. And there are a lot of, I have a lot of wealthy clients that are. He is not. And so he came in, hi, nice to meet you. What do you have to say? And I was like, well, I understand you're collecting guitars. I have these cool things. I work with these rock stars. And he was not into the rock culture at all. And he goes, well, why don't you show me some pictures? And he looked at my pictures. He's like, no. It was okay. Well, it's nice to meet you. And that was it. He was going to walk out. And I said, well, and again, a light bulb, and I just pulled this out of air. This was the moment of conception. I said, well, there is the Red Queen, but it's $50,000. And he just stopped. And he turns around and goes, what's the Red Queen? And I said, the Red Queen is a acoustic guitar that's made out of 50,000 pieces. He goes, I'll take it. So that was it. The sale went down.
But there was no Red Queen. There was no idea for Red. It was total spur of the moment, right?
There was zero. There was no concept whatsoever of the Red Queen. Yeah. So I instantly went to the history books, and I stole the wedge pattern from a guitar maker in Israel. His name is Boaz, and he made a guitar out of a pocket knife, and he did these wedges. And then I was a big fan of Richard Snyder, who developed the Kasha guitar with Dr. Kasha in the 70s and the 80s. Had the wedge offset sound hole, the wedge bridge, a lot of asymmetrical areas going on. And then I went to the Baroque period, and I started looking at a bunch of lutes on how they designed the back of their necks and the sides and this and that. And came up with the back and the sides and the concept of this guitar, which was a alternating bloodwood and flame maple instrument, Kasha design, offset sound hole, wedge bridge, and then I was going to do a bunch of small, checkerboard pieces to make the neck. And then I went to another artist who Sean Reeves, and I said, hey, can you draw me just your most insane inlay? It goes from the very top all the way to the bottom. It's got to have Alice in Wonderland concepts, Red Queen. And he's like, yeah. So we put it together, and I built that guitar in my little apartment on this little bench with little hand tools. But before, so this is the story that you don't know. Before he gave me his deposit, he sent a secretary person down to my shop. He said, "Hi, Randy, I'm working with blah blah blah. Here's the contract for the Red Queen, and here's a check." And so I looked over the contract, and I said, "Oh, there's a mistake here in the contract. It says that I'm only to make one Red Queen and never make a second." I said, "I specifically told him that he was going to be getting 1 of 10. And that was one of my ideas when he came into my shop. I said, the Red Queen, I said, I'm only making 10 and you can get number 1. And so he was like, oh, I'm interested in that. So in the contract, it said, you are not allowed to make 10 instruments. You can only make number 1. And so I said, well, I need to clarify this before I can sign this contract. So I emailed him, and he emailed me back. He said, he's like, don't worry about that. That's just a typo. Nothing to worry about. Just go ahead. I don't care. Make as many as you want. I just want number 1. So when I finished the Red Queen and I delivered it, he called me up. And again, I just wanted to express that I still like the guy, and he's taught me a lot, and he purchased more instruments from me. I have a lot of respect for the guy. He's a great teacher. But the lesson that I learned that day is he called me up and he said, I really love this Red Queen. You did a really good job. But I just want to remind you about the contract we signed and that you are not to make another Red Queen. And I was really mad. I was like, well, and so we had a little heated discussion on the phone, and he was just like, contract's a contract. Deal with it, buddy. So when I hung up the phone, I said, you know what? I don't even want to make a Red Queen, but I'll make a black king, and I'll make a white rabbit, and I'll make a blue bat, and I'll make the whole fucking series of Wonderlands based on all these characters. And so that's how the whole idea was born.
Yeah. Great. I did not know that. Oh, carry on.
I just finished another one for him last year, a white queen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I did not know that second part of the story. However, the first part of the story is really the part that I wanted to hear. It's that I wanted you to tell, because I've heard it. It is the idea that someone was there, they were going to walk, and you're like, one last chance, and you threw the idea.
I hit $1,000 on the line, So I'm not going
still, nonetheless. Randy, I just love that you threw out that idea, and then on top of that, you had to deliver a guitar that was believably $50,000, and you did.
It cost me $50,000 to make that guitar, if not more. I stressed over that instrument. It was beautiful. I thought. I mean, you've seen it, right? Yeah.
It's the reason I contacted you in the first place. I saw a picture of that guitar and said, "What the hell is this? And why don't I know this guy?" Because I thought I already knew all the amazing guitar makers that were alive. The ones that were doing something really unusual was sort of my MO already at this point in time. And so when I saw that guitar, and that I had never, honestly, I don't think I had heard your name. I didn't know who you were at that point in time. And maybe even my wife found it on Instagram. I'm not sure who found it. Someone showed me the picture. But that was the reason that you and I know each other at this point in time, was the images of that guitar. Yeah. Which
is amazing that one moment, that one moment of me coming up with that idea, we may not even know each other. I'm finishing a Red Buffalo this week.
Okay.
And it's for another one of my heroes. I don't really want to give out his name because I want to wait until he likes the instrument. Sure. I don't want to whore his name out and then have him not like the instrument. But
right.
It's basically it's similar to the Red Queen, but it has no inlay. It's a classical guitar, and I think it's one of my favorites as far as the way it feels and the playability. And then it has everything else to it as well.
Right.
And that's why in the beginning of this conversation, I told you about the three phases of guitar making. The first was the design and the beauty, and I think the Red Queen really nailed that. But the challenge after that was to produce a guitar that really felt and played good. And this Red Buffalo does that as well.
All that.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I'd love to experience a Parsons guitar these days. Because I've had many wonderful experiences with your guitars. And yeah, but it's been a while. Too long, Randy.
Yeah. Well, I think the presentation is so important. That's probably the next thing. And that's why I appreciate what you do. Guitar makers have a hard time competing with the dopamine effect that takes place in a music store. It's fun to go into Guitar Center with all the lights and all the sounds, shake hands with a smiling salesperson, and actually go home with that guitar. And then you get home and the case smells brand new and you have the documentation. There's no delay. The problem with sometimes with makers, you got to wait. You're dealing with a guy email. The build maybe gets delayed, and then it's just not that same experience. But with you, I feel like you can bring back that experience. You're that bridge. And that's kind of what, we haven't done any business in a long time, but you've been heavy on my mind about, I need to get back into that presenting, having you be that experience to the client, I think is very valuable. So that instead of me being there and emailing the guy, you can be there with my instrument. So anyways, we'll talk about that later, but that's kind of your goal, right? Is to bring that back.
Yeah, from the guitar makers side of things, I think a lot of guitar makers make the mistake of thinking that what we do is about, trying to sell their guitar. And they think, well, I'm already selling my guitars. What do I need help with that for? Not really what it's about. What it's about is unique world-class instruments that are super rare that most people never get a chance to experience. And because it goes to one person. And so someone like yourself, or, you look at someone like Michihiro Matsuda, and a Matsuda guitar is a 4-year waiting list, and he makes 6 guitars a year. How many people ever get to actually see in person or touch a Matsuda guitar? But yet Mishi chooses every 2 years to make a guitar and send it on tour at the Boutique Guitar Showcase because he wants people to try them. He wants people to have an experience with his guitars. And we're the only people who can put in the hands of thousands of people, which is what he wants to. He makes them for the world, but only a few people can actually have one, I guess, is part of it. And then that person can contact you and decide they want the guitar, whatever it happens to be. But that physical experience of being able to feel the excitement of the guitar, that wonder, that inspiration, is, as the industry develops, there's a refinement that happens. And you walk into a guitar shop today, there are very few brands in most guitar stores. They deal with a few of the major companies. Often the customer doesn't realize that, they might be seeing 18 different guitar brands, but they're only bought by 3 people because this company, Fender owns Jackson. They own Line 6, and and you look at all the people who have bought, and you realize that in the end, they're only doing business with 3 or 4 people, and the whole inventory is decided by the fact they do business with those 3 or 4 people. And so the problem with that for the customers is that wonder and excitement that is part of the sort of artistic experience, right? We go to an art gallery, we go to a concert, we want to experience something new, something of wonder, something that inspires us, and Randy, you do that so well. And so we consider that to be a big privilege to be able to take one of your incredibly inspiring instruments out to the world, because that is what happens. They see your instruments and they go, what is this? And they get closer and they wonder about it. And you go, what? Why is the fretboard? what's happening? Oh, it's 3 layers. It's 3 layers. Oh my God, that's crazy, and they and they dive deep into what's happening there with your guitars, and not everything's super elaborate. They love your bat also. They love your Henry Cash bat when it's got 3 strings, and a semi-hollow body that's got a sound hole in a completely different area, and sometimes, but there's always a bit of wonder, always a bit of excitement. So, you've sent us black lights that we have to sort of show, oh, look, there's a hidden message here in the fretboard. And I love that, the theatrical nature of what you do. You're very well aware of it. I know you are. And it's a real show. And you thrive on curiosity and wonder, and I think you make the world a better place for it. My life is certainly better for knowing you. And so thank you
I appreciate
for making
that.
inspiring guitars, Randy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'll send you I'm going to send you a new bat. It's got the coyote skull in the sound hole. But the cool thing is there's a little switch on the guitar. You can turn the light on. There's a light inside the skull. And so it looks like it's on fire. It's really cool.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
So, Randy, we're about out of time for our regular session here. We're about 90 minutes in. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for taking time to be on Life with Strings Attached. And for those of you who don't know, we will move over to our Business of Guitar on Patreon for another 5 to 15 minutes, where we'll talk something about what it's like to be a creative in business, which is often juxtaposed. We'll talk about that for just a few minutes. And if you want to listen to that part of it, then head over to the Business of Guitar /Patreon. And thank you for listening to us here on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this on all platforms. So thank you, Randy, and we'll say goodbye for now and carry on the business guitar.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you for watching and listening. You can find more episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. And a special thanks to those who support us on Patreon. It's your support that enables us to do this work.